You know, when you rob someone or remove someone, remove all of their livelihood, you have destroyed them. You have destroyed their life. All right, so I've been talking a lot about this, what's going on right now, what's in the news, and what's actually happening to people with the consequences of how the states and countries have reacted. I'm just addressing this conversation from the point of view of there isn't only one way to do things, that's all. And you can achieve similar or better results, but with a lot less pain and suffering to the people. And I'm not saying this as someone that is trying to act like someone that has all the answers, but it just occurs to me that if one was to sit down and do a brainstorming session to come up with other ways of just dealing with the pandemic and sickness and this kind of thing that's going on.
Lockdown?
Lockdown, right. And, you know, I'm sure they can come up with many other ways to handle it. One way would be just something that comes up to my mind, the top of my mind is, you know, you've heard me say this before, is education. Perhaps a lockdown would be a last resort, but only for a very brief period. None of this talk about 10 months and all this garbage. You know, you might do a lockdown until people are really kind of understanding that this is a serious matter, and then lifting it with the understanding that at the same time you've been communicating with people and telling them, look, this is how you spread disease. You need to stay away from people. You need to practice social distancing. You need to wear your mask.
Around people, not when you're walking and there's nobody around.
Around people, not when you're in a football-sized park and nobody's around.
On the sidewalks.
Not silly enforcement of silliness like that. You know, sensible things that just make sense and are appropriate. And along those lines, you know, the social distancing and definitely, if you're sick, don't go to work. Don't go to, you know, public gatherings, and don't. This has always been, you know, this has always been a wise way to be, and a wise thing to do and to act. It's always been that way in the old time, just common sense that doesn't seem to, you know, just be as common as it used to be. It's just people that used to rely on the sense of their elders, their grandparents and such. Maybe there isn't as much of that as there used to be. Perhaps that's one reason why that's missing in culture. However, if the government if states and countries are going to somewhat try to fill that void, they could easily be doing it in other ways other than just, you know, laying down a starvation, a lockdown for periods that are not sustainable for humanity. So clearly that's only one idea that's come to my mind. It seems, you know, to me to be a foundational and crucial issue. I mean, I've been to places and countries where they utilize educational methods to teach the population, and they put their message, you know, in a variety of mediums, and some places go so far as to putting a message on, like, products. Like, you buy a product and say, this is not good for your health, you know, this can cause cancer, this can do this and that. So just things like that, like you know, just brief messages during a pandemic of how you spread disease. I just recently watched a video about how the cruising industry, especially the foreign cruise industry, is making a lot of changes, and I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, you know what, these are just sensible things that should have been going on all along anyway.
Exactly.
Because you've got, if you've ever looked at a picture of a cruise ship, and this is like looking at an ant's nest of people. This is how many people are in a very small space.
Of course they're gonna catch stuff.
It's even worse than a church gathering or a football game.
They're all touching the same utensils.
Or it's the same, yeah.
Sitting at the same tables very close.
Yeah, because they're not just there for a couple hours, they're there 24/7 for the length of the cruise. So, you know, these are sensible things like, you know, enforcing the washing of your hands, especially before going to a what do you call it, buffet of all things, buffet where everybody's touching everything, and it's
awful.
just
they're all touching the same tongs.
Just
and everything.
the saying "a day late and a dollar short" comes to mind to me. But you know, better late than never also comes to mind. But you know, how much do people have to suffer in order to learn simple lessons and to have just general knowledge like this that everybody should have? Everybody's household should have this information, whether it's just coming from you know, your elders, your grandparents, your parents, or even the state and the country and the governments and the schools. It can also be supplementary from those institutions. I see that as a much better solution than to just destroy people's livelihood and pretend that millions of people aren't going to go bankrupt and starve.
Well, here's what I think is happening now. I think that a lot of people want the lockdown because they think people like me and you are going to give them the disease.
Yes, but
whatever they call it.
We just made a different video about fear and panic, and I agree that
people have been propagandized and told that asymptomatic people are giving off this coronavirus, which is a fallacy. They need the right information. I had to search very carefully, and not on the first page, not on second, not on third. It was way down there about asymptomatic people are not spreaders of viruses.
Yeah.
It's very, you would have to do this.
Well, here, listen to this. Okay, yeah, listen. I just read a quote by Albert Einstein that said that when people trust
in the masses?
When people trust their governments without thinking, that you know what? I'm going to have to read that quote. I have to go back and read it. I don't remember.
Stick it in there.
The point is, I was referring to the idea that, you know, in the days of old, people got their wisdom and their common sense from their elders, their grandparents, their parents, their family, people that learned lessons, life lessons through the years, through the ages, and it's people they can trust because it's their family. And so if you rely solely on institutions, they have a perceived credibility that isn't really there.
Here's the truth. If Americans had confidence that the government's response to this virus was wise and thoughtful and thoroughly rooted in science, they probably wouldn't be protesting against those decisions in the numbers they are. But they don't believe that, and they don't believe it for good reason. When the state of Michigan bans joint replacements but encourages abortions and lotto ticket sales, you know more than science is going on here. But you wouldn't guess that from watching most shows on television. The media are not bothering to report on what we really know or don't know about the virus. It's fascinating, but they're ignoring it. And they're certainly not holding anyone in power to account. They're not explaining the science of why it's necessary to close pools and parks and beaches all summer, why it's scientifically required to tell citizens to snitch on their neighbors.
One of the things that we can do is help your neighbor as much as you can. You know, if you know someone that's having a difficult time, you know, take a food basket over there. All right, so we've touched on the option, at least one option, and that would be education and not force. Just to make an example. When you have a situation based on benevolence, as an example, in the case of loving parents towards their children, you know that the children are going to need proper direction, and in a loving way, you're looking at giving them proper, kind correction and instruction. If you were giving them the stick every time they made a little mistake or didn't know what to do, that would be the opposite of loving instruction. So that's just a simplistic example in the case of benevolence. So if a situation where a parent is never showing benevolent instruction, or instead of benevolent instruction, especially in a time of crisis, they come out with sticks and stones, that pretty much paints a picture of what kind of a situation you're dealing with. And so the question becomes, if in fact authorities are benevolent and are looking after your, to serve and protect, why were other options such as education not explored and indicated? And why is it that the majority of governments around the world, this is the case? You have so many situations around the world that are so similar.
Think about the ever-increasing restrictions placed on our civil liberties, personal freedoms and property rights from politicians, police and other authorities who are dictating sometimes inconsistent and borderline bizarre edicts that are absolutely non-negotiable until they are. Last week, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews and Police Minister Lisa Neville forbid couples from visiting each other, with the Premier saying that's not work, that's not caregiving, that's not medical care, that's not shopping for the things you need when you need them. It is a price worth paying because it is going to save lives. Just a few hours later, it was no longer a life-saving sacrifice because the ban was overturned. Around the world, the overreach is apparent, whether it's a lone jogger on the beach being chased down, or a lone paddleboarder in the ocean being arrested, or this man in Philadelphia being forcibly removed off a bus for riding without a mask, even though there is no requirement to wear a mask.
You feel this, man? Look what the y'all calling me, dumbass! Get the off! Get the off my leg!
By the way, that happened in a city where police have been told to delay arresting actual criminals for actual crimes. Meanwhile, in Michigan, the Democrat governor has ordered shops to ban people from purchasing seedlings to grow their own fruit and vegetables. In the UK, we have police harassing people for being in their own garden.
This is a reason, when you look around and there's nobody out, it's because
you can't expect me
There's not no one out, go down the street, they're all over the place.
not me, it's the government.
You're not allowed on your front gardens, people.
All you see is the same thing just coming out. And I'm saying this with a couple things in the back here that I haven't brought forward yet. And one of them is authorities on a video saying they didn't know why people were protesting. They didn't know, or understand rather, they didn't understand why people normal working folks are protesting after their livelihood has been cut off for an indefinite period of time. People saying they can't feed their children, they can't pay their debts.
I have to feed my kids too. So does everybody around me. And I watched that clip before the break of Nancy Pelosi seemingly confused about what protesters were doing. Well, let me enlighten you, Nancy, because you seem to be living in an insulated $25,000 freezer ice cream bubble, and you don't get it. Here it is, plain and simple. People have to feed their families. These are smart Americans who are intelligent. They understand there's a risk. They live with risk every day. If you need to understand that, Nancy, go talk to a construction worker on a construction site down the block that is living with multi-million-dollar equipment that could kill him in a minute. If you tell him or her on that site, you're going to need to wear a mask. There are precautions. We may have to wear some kind of hand protection, wash our hands often, and we may have to distance, but you'll be able to go to work and feed your kids. I promise you, the entrepreneurial, brave American citizens will figure it the hell out. Get out of your bubble. People have to feed their kids.
When you rob someone or remove someone, remove all of their livelihood, you have destroyed them. You have destroyed their life.
Can you understand why they're doing that?
No, not really, because what we have to do is shelter in place. That is really the answer. Testing, tracing, treatment, shelter in place.
And the other clue here is this, that to add insult to injury, there are rumors going around within authoritative circles that what actually should be done is to actually tighten the screws even harder. So that gives me, and should give anyone that's observant, a clear indication of what the actual scenario that you're dealing with really is. So remember, all we have to do is critically take a look at the facts of what's happening in order to have a clear picture of what actually is happening. Thank you for watching our channel, and have a nice day.